STLH session. My name is Jinjin Tan. I'm the Assistant Director of MIT STL Real Estate Entrepreneurship Lab. I work closely with Director Hong to carry out our mission globally with a very special focus in China. Before we get started, I'll give you an overview of our second panel. Today we have two distinguished speakers with us today. They each will give us about 10 to 15 minutes talk, which will leave us 30 minutes discussion and dialogue time. And we will wrap up at around 3:15. The theme of our panel is opportunities in the urban regeneration. In the Western world, urban regeneration started about in the late 19th century. A century later, China has entered the era for urban regeneration, that is around 1980s. Despite the huge gap in the time difference, the two countries shared some similarities. For example, in the early urban regeneration effort, it started from to regenerate the urban poor and the constructed area, and to assemble the land to provide the public infrastructure and facilities for the residents. However, usually at a cost to displace the poor and marginalize the population. Well, more currently, urban regeneration is more focused on reframe the urban renewal as the engine for the economic and sustainable growth. It's my great pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Professor Shifu Wang. Shifu is the Fulbright Scholar at MIT Department of Urban Study and Planning. He is also professor and head of Urban Planning Department at South China University of Technology, Huanan Ligong. Shifu has been served on the Planning Committee member for municipalities in Guangzhou, Foshan, and Fuzhou. He has over 20 years experience in planning and implementing China's urban development. And today, Shifu will share with us his frontline story in the battlefield of China's urban regeneration. Please.
Okay. Thanks, STL, to invite. I'm very pleased to come here to share my understandings or some just observations about the circumstance of China's urban renewal. Yeah, I think China's urban renewal is related to the macro background of urbanizational process, through which the environmental and the social thresholds were met. So China now is experiencing a variety of problems without an expectation. That means every developed country perhaps has met them several decades ago. And the central government now initiate so-called, what's the pointer? So-called new normal, just mentioned by Hong. The central government urged the local government to shift from the implementation of the policy by tighter land resources quota and stricter environmental control, pollution control, to make the policy transformation to fixed spatial planning instead of the greenfield-based incremental expanding. So take this as a great background. We can find urban renewal in China has some universal and specific characteristics to be understood. The universal situation is that many existing built-up areas appear to decline. Similar with the downtown deterioration when the suburban sprawl happened, and the problem of the brownfield when the manufacturer transformed in developed countries. But specific of China's urban renewal is that a lot of low-quality substances, including quite a number of constructed, just oversupply of the ghost town or the new towns, accompany economic growth rather than recession. So there's very tricky things. That means we must renew our new town. That means and how to bridge the demand, that means the need, and with the supply is really a specific problem for China's urban renewal. And today I will briefly introduce two cases. One is the governmental-led non-market, and another is the compromise between the villagers, government, and stakeholders. So as a comparative view to the Boston mass development cases. This first case happened in 2005 to 2007. Before this case, the old city of Guangzhou is seriously disrupted. So it's because at that time we involved the market system, used the high profit oriented market driven to demolish and replace the old city is serious. So the municipal government of Guangzhou announced that all the developers were not allowed to involve the urban reconstruction project with the scope of the old city. So therefore, the government themselves undertook this project. So here, you will never see the market, because the market is a kind of very, very critical, very, very bad forces to change the old cities. This case is not a very big project in China, but it's located in the historical city. You can see the dark red indicates the existing buildings with good condition, or some high architecture values about the something like the landmark or historical buildings is evaluated by the planners, so they are preserved them. And the lighter one is the new build tailored to the site. So you can see it's a kind of organic infillment in the old city. So the result is you can see renovate the old one, and the white is the new build. We can say they are in harmony with the old buildings. So I think it's a great step to perform the historical preservation at the urban renewal process. You can imagine the old times, such project will be demolished and replaced with the high-rise. So you can see the old and the new, and from the new to see some nostalgia to the old. So this case, the policy here is so-called on-site self-balance. That means the residents entirely move back by volunteer decision. They just only need to pay very low fees to cover the construction fee to regain the original floor area, and some a little bit lower price than the market price for the existing floor areas to improve their conditions. And the government reconstruction cost, because here we use the public investment, has been recovered through the sale of commercial street stores. Here, the Planning Bureau permit 1,500 square meters commercial use. Most of them are street stores. They can make great value, so they can easily recover the public money from the selling of the stores. On the issue of the authenticity, which is we want to discuss today, we can see this case is physically improved while socially unchanged. But is it very fair to the general? We can discuss, but it's a good, I think, vision here, and for the government to reject the developers into the market, into the redevelopment of the old city. The second story comes with more complexity. Is happened in 2007. You can see until 2007, it still maintained a traditional fabric as an urban village just inside the CBD of Guangzhou. But in 2009, the dramatic transformation took place. You can see. And here, there is a great deal between villagers, local government, and the developers. In this map, the land will be divided to 3 parts. The east part will be the resettlement for villagers. It's a high-rise style resettlement. And for the west side, the southwest is so-called collective-owned commercial land area. That means collective-owned by the villagers. They build a hotel and some commercial apartment to make money for the future income. And it's very important functional plot is the northeast. They sell. That means the government help the villager to make the deal. In China, it's very specific policy to transform collective-owned farmers' land to state-owned to the market. So government just establish a green path, that means shortcut to sell it and do not take the land price. That means totally give the money back for the villagers to cover the reconstruction project. So it's a kind of compromise, negotiation, and a lot of that means something happened in only 1 year or 2 years to make the compromise. So this is the process. You can see this is the resettlement of the new village. You can imagine it is a standing high-rise village now. At the same time, the villagers rebuild a global ancestor hall and renovate the old house along the river. You can see this from here. They are collected to rebuild here. And some are the 1 or 2 is the original one, but most of the ancestor are rebuilt in the project. And the old house along the river is still renovated. And in this case, the case is so-called government village market joint effort. And the villager sold part or 1/3 of their part, the land, to finance all the construction process. And they three, that means come together to maximize the location value because this is a new CBD. On the issue of the authenticity of this village, it is shown as physically rebuilt totally, while socially changed at the same time. Result in the exotic urban village now, the village itself changed from the original broad-based primitive community to a shared capital joint venture. But it's still, the villagers, because they are still maintain many traditional activities you can see in the CBD. So it's very interesting, but a lot of chaos are coming together to take this compromise result. It's a dream model for other villages now. So I really want to get this leader mode is good for our reconstruction. So after the 2 cases, very briefly, I will come. I think some notions should be worth discussing today. First is it any opportunity in China? Just mentioned last, because more and more affluent urban residents with the ability to consume are unsatisfied with the built environment. Is it some potential market vitality, just entrepreneurship, new kind of the developers should be involved, or should we make some business here? And the second point is how to make the profit reconfiguration fairly. I just mentioned 2 cases should be criticized due to the policy-oriented profit supply to specific project beneficial with the buyers of general fare in the city. So is it easy to be promoted and copied, or just like a stable policy? We throw great doubt on it. And how to maximize the social benefit of the urban renewal is still unclearly defined. So we can do a lot of things. Physical standard, institutional systems now is urgently needed to be established in China. But I think there is a great question when I come to United States to learn from some PRA experience or Boston experiences, how to change our totally policy systems to improve the both physical and non-physical quality from the developing level to step by step go to the developed level. Perhaps it's a topic can be discussed here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor. Thank you to share with us two fairly unusual two cases in China, because I remember the first cases. I'm a kid growing up in the inner city in Shanghai, and my neighborhood was totally regenerated in early 2000, and it was totally wiped out with a new tower coming in. So I totally know why you say it's atypical, the first cases. So it's very fascinating for me to see now the planners and the professionals start to have this awareness of to protect this historical character of the neighborhood. So, but I still, even though with this controversy, I still feel urban renewal in general is welcomed by the Chinese general public as a tool for their economic development. Well, on the contrary, when we move to the context of U.S., we all know over half a century ago, Jane Jacobs published The Life and Death of Great American Cities, which is the first and the strongest critique of large-scale urban renewal projects. And 70 years since passed, and after the book was published, there is a movement, organized movement by the community to oppose this urban renewal initiative. And Boston, for example, being one of the country's oldest community, like 1/3 of the city of the neighborhood was demolished, and back then, and the 70 years passed, and Boston has outgrown its initial stage of urban renewal, and we all know has incubated a lot of innovative urban renewal projects. So next, I would like to, with great honor, I would like to introduce our second speaker, Richard Henderson, who is the Executive Vice President for Mass Development. Mass Development is a quasi-public agency. It's Massachusetts Commonwealth Economic Development and Finance Agency. Richard leads Mass Development's real estate division, managing 4 departments undertaking planning, development, engineering, and asset management activities. Richard has led numerous award-winning planning and urban renewal projects in the U.S. So we are very lucky to have him today to share with us his story here in Boston and in Massachusetts. Among Richard's portfolio is the successful South Boston 400 acres waterfront development. And I will now leave the stage to Richard to share with us the Boston and Massachusetts urban regeneration journey.
Thank you. So, as you mentioned, urban renewal in Boston has a checkered history. Some of the most controversial urban renewal projects in the United States happened right here in Boston. And there were major battles over renewal versus gentrification, renewal versus historic preservation. And vestiges of those battles still linger today. There is a sense of urgency now around affordable housing that was a very different situation back in the 1950s when urban renewal started. Back then, Boston was seen as a place where nobody wanted to live, and the city planners were trying to counteract the move of the middle class to the suburbs by bringing luxury housing back into the city, and felt they needed to clear old neighborhoods out to bring the middle class back. We're in a very different mode right now, where everyone seems to want to live in Boston, and the existing population, in many cases folks who don't have large incomes, are being pushed out. And so there's some new models that are emerging around how do you do urban regeneration without losing what makes Boston Boston, which is a diverse population, and a very historic architectural character, and a very, it's really a city that is made up of cities, of tightly knit neighborhoods that have very strong cultures. How do you retain those important things? So the most infamous example of urban renewal in Boston was the West End clearance. The West End was a neighborhood of about 7,500 residents at the time it was cleared. It had as many as about 23,000 folks a few decades prior to that. It was a neighborhood of 4- and 5-story tenements, very dense, a lot of immigrant population, a very vibrant place, but it was considered by the planners to be a slum that really needed to just be taken away. The entire neighborhood, starting from the river, you can see sort of halfway through. This is the entire neighborhood here, halfway through the destruction of the entire neighborhood. This was not the first time that a neighborhood, perhaps not on this scale, but smaller neighborhoods had been of tenement housing, triple deckers, which is a standard housing type in this city, had been taken away and replaced with new housing. But this is the first time when the new housing coming back in no way accommodated the existing population of the neighborhood and did not include any affordable housing. In this case, the entire neighborhood population was pushed out on very short notice. They were mostly renters, so they didn't really receive any money for the homes. The landlords got the money, not that there was a lot of money. And so they were just left to find their way in the city. There was a huge backlash against this. The Boston Redevelopment Authority, which was set up in these days just after the West End was taken down, tried during the 1960s to replicate, perhaps on a smaller scale in different areas of the city, the same kind of process, and there were enormous protests in neighborhood after neighborhood, sometimes successful in stopping urban renewal, sometimes not successful. But the general feeling of the public was, we're not going to let this happen again, ever. Combined with that backlash around the gentrification or the movement of people out of a neighborhood, there was also a very strong historic preservation movement that came into being, fighting against the loss of the historic character of the community and its buildings. And in the early 1970s, the city did a very enlightened thing in retaining the historic Quincy Market, and it was the old, basically vegetable market, meat market of the city. It was obsolete. The markets moved to a different part of town. The buildings were empty. And instead of demolishing them, the city decided to refurbish them and created a new use for those buildings, which is the Faneuil Hall Marketplace, which was phenomenally successful and remains incredibly successful as a destination where people from all around the country come to go shop there, to eat there, and it really spurred a belief in people who lived in the suburbs that Boston was a place to come to again, and at least to visit, and perhaps to live. And so following those years, we really had a regeneration of interest in living in the old historic neighborhoods of Boston. And this is a comparison of the West End. What was built on the West End was high towers, luxury housing. It is a place where very few people go because there's no reason to go there. very dull. I've been there once, never went back. And the comparison is, an apt comparison is the North End, which is a neighborhood very much like what the West End was. Very, very dense, narrow streets, 4 or 5 story buildings, tiny apartments, strong ethnic population, in this case the Italian population of town, street front shops. North End is considered an absolute gem. It's a place where everyone wants to be. Hanover Street on any Friday or Saturday night is jammed with people from all over the city, all over the region. It is a place where housing values are actually pretty equal to the luxury housing that was built in the West End. When you look at rental apartments, they're renting for about the same amount per square foot in what was in the 50s considered a slum, as compared to what was considered luxury housing. So this is something, back to Shifu's point about authenticity. The authenticity of the North End is something that we want to capture and keep and celebrate. So the agency I work for did an interesting project on the edge of the West End in an area that was later cleared for a new government center, an enormous swath of downtown Boston. And there were several large standalone office buildings put up for different government uses. This is one of the state office buildings, the Saltonstall building. It was a kind of traditional tower in a park. It had a plaza in the front, and a plaza in the back, and a plaza on the side that nobody ever really spent any time in. It didn't really relate to its historic surroundings across the street in the Beacon Hill neighborhood. And what we did was the building became a sick building. It had asbestos in the air ducts, in the air system. They had to evacuate all the state workers from the building, and the state didn't have enough money to figure out how to renovate the building and bring the workers back in. They turned it over to Mass Development, and we decided we would renovate the tower, but then also knit back the urban fabric to match the houses that still stood on the other side of the street, bring retail activity to the main street, create housing that was a mix of market rate housing and affordable housing. 25% of it was affordable units. And then in the tower, bring the power of the private sector to help finance the project by having the top 13 floors of the tower be renovated for private sector office, where the bottom floors of the tower were kept for state agencies. State agencies pay a very low rate lease, and the project was able to work financially by renting out the space on the upper floors and selling the condominiums and renting the retail space. So this is a reuse of what was an urban renewal site, and putting it to much better uses and bringing back some of that historical context to the city. In my previous position, I worked at Massport. This is a much larger scale redevelopment of a whole swath of the Seaport District, just south of the CBD. Massport being the entity, it's a state agency that runs the airport and the Port of Boston. There is about 70-acre area called the Commonwealth Flats that was, in its time, all rail yards serving piers. This is the Boston Fish Pier. This was called the Commonwealth Pier that had a huge warehouse building, essentially, where ships would pull up and bring cargo in. And this was completely disused. And the reuse of this area was carried out in the 1990s, for the most part, in the 2000s, with primarily new construction. But some of the buildings were saved, and we were very careful to make sure we saved The Commonwealth Pier itself became primarily the main trading floor for Fidelity Investments. Thank you. And the Fish Pier itself, going back to authenticity, we retained. And a lot of people thought, well, they'll just want to get rid of the fishermen and redevelop the buildings for some higher and better use. But we really felt we were the port, after all, and retaining these historic buildings, but also the historic uses, was an important part of what made Boston, Boston, and what made the Seaport District. And so you have juxtaposed people unloading fish, the real old economy of the seaport, something that's very deep in Boston history, as well as new shining office towers and housing and so forth. Very quickly, I'll go through some other projects that I was not involved with, but want to point out this is a project that my boss, the CEO of Mass Development, was very involved with. This was a public-private renewal of a public housing project called Harbor Point, about 1,500 units on the water, but in a very kind of cut-off area in Boston. It became a very, very dangerous area. Only about 300 families lived there in the end when it was renewed. And the company she worked for, Corcoran Jennison Corporation, worked with the city to basically renew the project as a mixed income with about slightly fewer units, about 1,300 units. But it's been a very, very successful reuse of this, more green space. The buildings look a lot nicer. There's a mix of new and rehab units, and it's been a real success. This is a quick example of private sector renewal of what was originally one of the earliest urban renewal sites, the New York Streets area of the South End. It was renewed to create an industrial area where the Boston Herald newspaper was located and some other industrial sites. It has now been subsequently renewed just in recent years, taking an industrial area, much like Massport taking over an old industrial area that was not needed anymore, for housing, something called the Ink Block. These units are mostly market rate, but to the notion of social equity, the city of Boston has a policy whereby a certain number of affordable units have to be incorporated in any new market rate development of any size, so that 13% of the units in this complex are actually low-cost affordable units that are very, very much less expensive than the market rate units. And then finally, an example of neighborhood-led renewal. This is the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative. This is a neighborhood in Roxbury that really just got fed up with empty lots and disinvestment and garbage on the streets and so forth, and said, we're going to take matters into our own hands. We are going to renew our own community. And working with the city remarkably gave this entity, this neighborhood entity, eminent domain powers, granted to the city generally, only kept by the city, but they granted them to this group so that they could assemble lots. And they have built 400 new homes, renovated 500 homes, and really created a community-based model with a land trust and very deep community involvement to renew this neighborhood. And one of the interesting things is one of the early people who, as a young person, was very much involved with the Dudley Street Initiative and got their start, is now the Chief Development Officer of the City of Boston years later, John Barrows. So it's a wonderful example of not only renewing a community, but involving folks in that renewal who actually learn and grow and become important leaders in the community.
Thank you. Thank you, Richard, for giving us a fascinating 50 minutes trailer for Boston and Massachusetts. 60 years innovation experience in the urban renewal effort. I think it's fascinating that it is still evolving, like it's still proposing new business model that can foster more social, responsible, and sustainable growth, not just for the economic development's sake. So I want to link back to the challenges. One of the challenges that Shifu mentioned is the policy, regulatory, the framework for the overall urban renewal. Because the cases, they're very unique. It's a market. It's not market driven. It's the government. So it seems that the outcome largely depending on the behavior of the developer. So I guess I want to ask Richard, what do you think? Because I know you work closely with Boston Redevelopment Authority, and we have the chief planner of BRA with Carlos with us today. So my question is that, what do you think the policy regulatory framework that BRA set for its developer to encourage this socially responsible behavior? Because that's the more bigger vision that we want to learn from.
Right. So we could let Caro speak, but it really is a partnership. Even when it is a purely private development, like the Ink Block, that's on now private land. They bought the site from the Boston Herald, I assume. There is a very strong community process that is led by the BRA. There are certain thresholds you must have, like the inclusionary housing policy, which mandates that a certain number of housing units have to be affordable. But there are a lot of other things that get into the discussion. Some of them have to do with design. How high are the buildings? What do they look like? There are design guidelines that differ, obviously, in different parts of the city. But there's also a design discussion in the community process. They can be very painful. It can go on for a long time. But ultimately, at the end of the day, generally there's some kind of consensus. Not everyone is always happy, but there's some kind of consensus around how big is this, how high is it, how dense is it, what is the affordability component. And sometimes there are trade-offs between, you might go for a higher building that has more affordable housing units, or in other communities they may say, we would like the lower building, and we're willing to just live with the basic level of affordable housing.
I see. Yeah, and because in your 100 Cambridge Street case, that's a very famous neighborhood, like Beacon Hill.
Beacon Hill is a tough neighborhood to go
they're
through,
very
yes.
tough. They're notoriously protective of the neighborhood, and
Right.
I read that the project has been passed like by the BRA and also the neighborhood association almost without any opponent. Is that how you?
So that was in a case where because we were a government agency and we weren't seeking to make a high profit, and in the end we did well, but actually for a while it was a little iffy as to whether we were going to make money. We decided to commit to a pretty high percentage of affordable units. And there, we had an easy time because the building was so ugly and the plaza was so ugly. It was so that anything we did would be better than what was there. So there was, and I would say, generally, that is the case, but there have been examples, actually, where, for example, Suffolk University was trying to develop a crummy old building next to us, and they had a horrible time. To what I thought was probably a pretty good idea. So it can vary, obviously, and maybe we were just lucky.
Yeah, and also an interesting point is that you didn't start as making profit, but actually you make a huge profit out of it.
In the end, we recently, it is on a ground lease, so ultimately the Commonwealth owns the land and will own the building.
Yeah.
But we just sold I guess we assigned the ground lease to a private entity for $280 million, even though the lower half of the tower is still occupied by the Commonwealth, and will have a below market rent for the next 65 years.
Wow.
We still were able to make that kind of money.
It's a really great deal. You just you not only make the balance for the initial cost to initiate this huge, big development, but also make it more sustained financially.
Financially, in the end, it was very sustainable.
Yeah. So I want to ask Shifu. Actually, I heard that Guangzhou is just establishes urban redevelopment authority.
Yeah.
So, do you think all this policy that the U.S. or Boston experience will to some extent be transferred to China, that China will pick up the experience here and provide this regulatory support for this, encourage this more better behavior from the developer community.
Absolutely. I think this is one of my main purpose to come to here as a visiting scholar. And after my involvement about the social public hearing and the BRA project and the Chinatown community area, I really appreciate, and as a professional planner, I understand and really appreciate just what you mentioned, the great effort through the process to make the compromise or consensus. It's really a tough work for planners.
Yeah.
I think in South China, we are confident that some issues and some new reforms can be learned from here. But here come out because the project I have read from your website following Shenzhen, I have a question to ask back from Boston. For the case of 100 Cambridge, the primitive property ownership is public. It's a kind of state office.
Yes.
And you just mentioned the final deal to recover most developments invest is to sell its ground lease to a private corporation.
Yes.
So here, something is totally changed. That means, is there any leakage of the public interest? Because I think the public value is at least should be considered both community profit and the general public of the, just like the public sector. You just transfer or sell some ownership to the private. Yeah.
How do you
Is there-
adjust the financial gains
Yeah,
to the
because
general?
in China we are very strictly limited our property.
It's not soldable.
Yeah, we
you
cannot sell the
it to
public
private.
land. Any buildings on the public land can be sold to the private sector.
Yes.
So I guess the question is how do you justify it?
How do I justify?
Just the-
Well, technically, we didn't sell it.
Okay. Rent, long-term
A
rent.
very long-term lease, right? And but also the primarily most of the money went back to the Commonwealth, which they've already spent it on healthcare or whatever they spend money on, all the things that the public spends money on. But it did not go to, say, the neighborhood, for example. It didn't go to the local residents. In your case, it's a fascinating one. It's actually the villagers benefiting, which is a bit similar to how the Dudley Street setup was. In the Massport scenario, the buildings are built by the private sector on a ground lease, and Massport tends to, they have a very complex ground lease where they actually will get a fixed rent. They might get an upfront payment for the land, but it's not the full value of the
How long
land.
is the ground lease?
Ground lease might be 95 years. For industrial property, it might be more like 55 or 65. But then they will get an annual rent, which increases over time. And they will, in fact, also get what they call a transaction rent when the private sector refinances or sells their property and they make a bundle of money. A chunk of that goes back to the Port Authority. So that as the district's value grows, and that district years ago was worthless, it was not worthless, but it was desolate. There was nothing happening down there. Now it's the hot place to be. Everybody wants to be down there. General Electric Corporation is moving down there and so forth. The value is increasing dramatically, and Massport, because it didn't just sell the land off, they get to get that value increase for their public purposes of running the port and so forth for a long, long time.
It's carried out in a very thoughtful, financially thoughtful way. Like
We
you have
thought
a
so.
long-term vision, not
Right.
just the selling and doing the
Right. And there certainly is a pressure to say, just get the money now, get out.
Yeah. Always.
Yeah.
I see. And before I open the question to our audience, since one of the object of this panel is for the both U.S. and China's professional urban region professional to learn and inspire from each other. I would like to invite Richard to ask a tough question to Shifu.
Okay, a tough question.
Or challenging.
So I thought the examples you gave were fascinating and very forward-looking. And I'm wondering, did this happen in this particular city because it had a particularly forward-looking administration? Or, as I understand it, it's towards the south of China, right? Is there any influence of people knowing what's going on in Hong Kong and having a different sense of how things are done in Hong Kong? Or why in this particular city did these examples take place?
If I do not answer the question directly, if we trace back to the Chinese history, the South China, especially Guangzhou, always is the start point of the revolution. Even from the old system, the old feudal system to the democracy, and then from the democracy to modern. The first, just like Massachusetts, the first this is a historical basement. Another, not only we are far away from the capital, but I think the grassroots organization or grassroots consciousness is better cultivated. There is a very so-called small government in South China. But this is not the answer, I think, but it's the background. What we want to know is very interesting. I never think it very clearly, but I think some experience from Guangzhou, especially just like the negotiation between the village and the local government, now is very spreadly understand and studied by the academic scholars. They just draw some conclusion. Yes, here's some public-private experience. Can it relate to the so-called new normal? Such things are happened here and there in South China. But just we are a testing field about the Chinese new normal. So I think it's my not my answer, but my kind of feeling. South China is very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you. As the time passed really fast, we only have 10 minutes left, and since Shifu already used your one question quota, so I'm going to give it to the audience. I would like to welcome any questions from our audience, and also I know we all have in our audience. We also have the planner from Shanghai Planning Authority, Professor Wang Ling. She's also one of the speakers for our next session. She is also the expert in Shanghai China regeneration. So you may have some questions for our speakers.
Oh, great. That's two excellent talks. So I enjoyed it a lot. So I would like to pose a question to Richard. Yes, I think Boston has come over a long history and go over through, destroy everything, and then preserve a lot of things, and now set a very good example of the regeneration of the cities, especially that BRA play a very important role in the city. So Shanghai and China now has come over to a turning point that we say there's a urban regeneration, or even as my point with renew is kind of the pull out everything and build new things. So regeneration is something that we pay respect to the surroundings, to the cultural, and even to the people. So that's kind of thinking that maybe we do not use the renew. We began to use the 旧城改造is in China is renew or reconstruct, redevelopment. Okay, but now is we come to a new word. It's called 更新. It's a new regeneration or not new, regeneration or revitalize or re something like that. Yeah. So, but now there's some points that we think it's the policy that you mentioned, that Jinjin mentioned, that the policy for regeneration, because that means we build something in the existing environment. So we need some new policy. So I would like to have questions on two of your cases. One is the 100 Cambridge streets. That means that you make a building become a mass function, right? But yeah, so the key point that do you add some FAR to that part because you have
We did.
right? So that's but as my point, well, you have a zoning that means you cannot change it. So why you can add new FAR to this area? That's very important because we need that.
Right, can you change FAR?
Okay.
So, number one, we would argue that we, as being an entity of the state government, trump the city's zoning,
Yeah.
and that we can do what we want, but we choose to work with the BRA because we love Kairos. But I would also say one of the fascinating things about Boston is that the zoning is actually, historically, has been capped at a very low rate so that there's always a deal to be made. And very little of the larger projects in the downtown, very little of it is done as of right zoning. And so there is a lot of wheeling and dealing, if I may say, a lot of negotiation around how much are you going to exceed the zoning by, rather than we're just going to build it the way the zoning says.
Okay, that's great. That's a very important strategy for rezoning the place for the place of.
And it will be interesting to see what happens as the city rezones and does its first master plan in 50 years. They're upzoning certain areas. How are they going to deal with actually having zoning that people would actually want to build just to the zoning, and then how do you wheel and deal? How do you make the deals anymore if it's as of right? And so it'll be interesting to see if there are, I think what may be happening is they're going to be building into the zoning code a sort of, okay, this is the base. If you want a bonus to go higher, then you have to build more affordable units. They're already talking about that.
System, right? That's a discretionary.
Discretionary,
like
yes.
Very labor intensive for the BRA. I think we put a lot of pressure, like for the BRA. That's what Vancouver used for the discretionary. The outright, the outright is
Outright, you can do something.
Yeah.
Add one.
Yeah, you don't need any design guideline at all. It's one.
Yeah.
And then there's some crazy developer do that. But then if you want to achieve the maximum, you have to go through all the design review.
Right.
Yeah, that's really important because I think if in the inner city, that's sometimes the FAR makes sense for regeneration. And actually, I have a second question for you that is about the harbor point.
Yes.
So, and I mean that you mean that there was a very bad place, okay? But you make it to be a new one. So, what the change except for green spell?
Yeah.
What else do you do?
Right.
Do you relocate the people? How can you make them make that part? Because it's always a big argument in China because you move people out and you build new things.
Right.
So, yeah.
Well, in that case, and I'm not an expert on that particular one, but it was so bad, and sometimes things have to just get so bad that it's almost easier to build up from there. There were only 350 families or so living in a 1,500 unit complex, and in the new development there were 400 units of affordable housing in a 1,300 unit complex. So it became less of an entirely low income area and more of a mixed income area. But there were so few people living there at the time that I don't know exactly how many of those 350 families moved back directly into the, Kairos might know, but I'm sure some number of them did move back, maybe some moved to other places. But it was partly just physical improvements, certainly, but I think it was partly also an experiment in, it is a beautiful site. It has great views of the downtown. In not having such a huge concentration of poverty in it is a remote site. It's kind of cut off from the rest of the city, so it became a concentrated area where people just didn't want to go there. I think as a mixed income site with a harbor walk that people walk along, it probably has become a place where both the lower income people and the middle income people feel comfortable living there, perhaps because it's more of a diverse community. I think diverse communities work better than wholly wealthy communities like the West End, which is very boring, or wholly poor communities.
Let's move up to any other question. Any other question?
Thank you.
I have two questions for Professor Wang. From my understanding, the property tax is an important leverage for the U.S. government to generate public equity for urban redevelopment. So should we learn from their experience to ensure the financial feasibility for the Chinese government? And the second question is that you mentioned that the two cases help to preserve the local, the original demographic and also the original traditions. So I wonder how are the voices from the local residents are reflected in this planning process. So because I have heard very extreme opinions about community engagement, so I want to hear about your opinion on this. So thanks.
Okay, two great questions. I think first, many scholars and policymakers now discuss it's time to change our land revenue policy to property tax in China because the land is not enough to get money. But to this issue is related to your first question. I think it's not easily to change it sharply, but step by step. I think just the experience from Boston, something in between the land revenue and the property tax happened here. That means perhaps long-term release or long-term ownership sharing or just contemporary permission, a lot of things. I think that means the policy innovation should be addressed. The start point is give up the land revenue. I think now most of the scholars and the policymakers make the consensus, but only consensus here. How to change it to another tax-based system. So this is my answer. That means we should learn from some status in between it and to push it from the regional result. Second is very interesting, just mentioned by Zhenzhen. Guangzhou established the first urban renewal authority. It's the same administrative level as planning bureau. So I know Boston is very special. It's only one combined authority here. Most of the situation is the parallel system. That means planning permission is still held by the planning bureau. So now Guangzhou faced it, but yes, we can say rezoning is more general public, so it should be decided by planning authority. But renewal or regeneration project is a micro or partial benefit issues. So it greatly relates to your second question. Guangzhou established the new provisions of the urban renewal is that in the old city or the old village, before the proposals submitted to even to the urban planning authority or renewal authority, the proposal must gain at least 80% or 90% consent. That means agreement from the stakeholder. If the village is the villager, if the old city is the residents. So I think it's a great step to go forward to the public, just you mentioned, how to involve it. That means you should come to them and take the agreement from them. Even they are not willing to attend just like the public hearing community because Chinese people is to some extent closed, not very general opening to. So first we go this way, but I think something like the public hearing, the community participation, all here in Cambridge, the participational budget can be some new mediation to attract the people to express themselves. Well, I think it's a very something like a startup of the social.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Professor Wang. I regret to say that our time is up, and I would like to wrap up session by thank you for our speaker for your fascinating talk and it's a wonderful dialogue. I hope we achieve part of our objective today, which is to share and unlock some of the opportunity that urban regeneration bring and to foster more sustainable and social responsible growth. And I wish that our dialogue and will continue after the conference that I hope China and the US will keep to learn from and inspire by each other. And I thank you all for your participation. Thank you. And we'll have since we are 3 minutes over, so we'll have a 12 minutes break. And our third panel will be moderated by Professor Joe Coughlin from MIT H Lab on the Senior Housing Issue in China. Yeah. So thank you.